We should probably get started. It looks like folks have had an opportunity to log in. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Michael King. I'm the Executive Director here at the Southwest Seattle Historical Society, and I am, as always, thrilled to welcome you to tonight's program. We've got a great presentation in store for you tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the Historical Society and our Log House Museum are located on the traditional lands of the Duwamish people, past and present. And of course, the Duwamish are Seattle's first people. We are grateful to the Duwamish for stewarding this land throughout the generations. As I mentioned, again, we've got a really great presentation in store for you tonight, and we're thrilled to be joined by this evening's presenter, Judy Bentley, who's been a longtime friend and advocate for the Historical Society. And I guess it probably goes without saying as well that her presentation and the subject matter, it's perfect timing. I hope it inspires all of us to put on our hiking boots and hit the trails while we've still got some time this fall. So if Judy's presentation inspires you to pick up a copy of her book, I wanted to let you know that it's available for sale at Paperboat Booksellers here in West Seattle, as well as at the Pegasus Book Exchange in the Junction. Both Paperboat Books and Pegasus have been strong supporters and advocates of the Historical Society, and I'd encourage you to purchase your books from either of those locations if you're interested. I should note as well, we do have the book for sale here at the museum, so it's a good reason to stop by if you're interested in that as well. I do want to take a moment as well to thank our partners at the Seattle Public Library whose support sustains this series, and our sponsors at Luna Park Cafe, For Culture, Duwamish Tribal Services, Home Street Bank, and our newest sponsor, Alki Beach Academy. All of our sponsors' generosity makes these free experiences possible, and we could not do this without them. So thanks again to our sponsors. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining us. I know many of you have tuned into our programs before, and so you're probably quite familiar with how we handle our Q&A. We're going to try something a little bit different this evening to help recreate a sense of dynamism that we're missing from an in-person experience. So if you have a question for Judy this evening, we'd ask that you either type it into the Q&A function, or if you want to raise your hand at the end of the program via Zoom at the bottom of the screen, our moderator will unmute you so you can ask Judy your question directly. So again, either type into the Q&A function or raise your hand via Zoom. With all that, again, I'm going to turn things over to Dora Faye Hendricks, who is a trustee here at the Historical Society and, of course, the series chair. So Dora Faye, it is all yours.
Thank you, Michael. I wanted to add a note before I start the introduction that Judy and I talked months ago, and she chose this time of year because it is good hiking time. So thank you again, everyone, for being with us. Many of you probably know our presenter, Judy Bentley. She's a former presenter for Words Writers of Southwest Stories and helped create this program of the Southwest Seattle Historical Society some 9 years ago. She's written many books. 15 books of young adult nonfiction, hiking guides, history, and biography. She taught composition, literature, and Pacific Northwest history for more than 20 years at South Seattle College. Judy was born in Indiana, went to Oberlin College in Ohio, lived and worked in New York City, then moved with her husband and 2 children to Seattle. She hikes, bikes, and has served on boards of organizations such as ours, the Southwest Seattle Historical Society. She walks along pathways that have resonance for her. Alki, the Duwamish River, Cold Creek, Yakama Pass, Pallets Pass, and the Columbia Hills. Her first book for a general audience was Hiking, Washington's History, published by the University of Washington Press, followed by Walking, Washington's History, 10 Cities. The second edition of Hiking, Washington's History, which she is presenting tonight, was co-authored with guidebook author Craig Romano and published just this year with new hikes, updates, and more detailed trail information. Also this past year, Judy published a book entitled 25 Sugarland Road, Letters of Love and War from 1943 to 45, a chronicle of war and the home front, told through the letters of her young, newly married parents. We're honored to present one of our very own active members tonight, Judy Bentley. Hear
Thank
the
you.
applause, Judy.
Thank you, Dorothy and Michael. It's good to be back here, so to speak, even if I'm only in my own room, own house too. Good to see you. And I would like to repeat the acknowledgement that Michael gave. We are on Duwamish land, and we will be hiking and talking about Duwamish land tonight. This is Ken Workman welcoming a group of West Seattleites to a trail in the West Duwamish Greenbelt. And Ken is an eloquent spokesman for the presence of the Duwamish still on this land. And I will be talking about this trail later on. When I'm hiking, I want to know who's been here before. How did this trail come to be? Why is it here? And how long has it been here? Where are people going? So that's how I got into hiking for history. Not just for solitude, not just for exercise, not even just to kind of find a place away from the crowds, but also to find out where we fit into the landscape and into the thousands of people who have come before. I first started historic hiking when we were living in Bellevue, had just moved out here, early 1980s, and I could follow a social trail, just a trail that people's walking had created. It quickly became a deer trail, and there were still deer on the trail. And it would lead me gradually to Coal Creek through a little bit of underbrush. And I could hike along this creek and see nothing but what seemed to me like the great outdoors, the woods. It was in a ravine. I knew there were houses, a whole suburban housing development on one side and a parkway on the other, but you really couldn't hear it or see it. And so as I walked along this creek named Coal Creek, I, of course, began to notice signs of the history of this area, including chunks of coal. And I came eventually to this sign on a tree that said Locomotive Turntable, which seemed a rather strange sign to be out in this area. The sign is no longer there, but the foundations of what indeed was a turntable for a train locomotive are there, covered with moss and ferns and leaves at the right time of year. So this was the history I was walking here, was the history of coal mining on the east side of the lake, what was then the Pittsburgh of the West, a coal mining empire that produced coal shipped to Seattle on this railroad to the base of Lake Washington and around the world, really, and to San Francisco for power needs. And I also went to the Issaquah Alps Club, would have, and the Newcastle Historical Society would sponsor something called Newcastle Days, in which they told the history of the area and pointed out anomalies in the landscape, like this big black hole, which you can approach close to this railing here. And this is an air shaft, which was led out of the mines. It became an escape route for an air shaft like this, became an escape route for miners when there was a fire in the mines. Mining occurred here in the 1890s through the 1920s, when the brand of coal was not as strong, as good as some others, and competition from oil. But some mines continued into the 1960s in what has become, a very flourishing suburban area of the east side. So that's what got me into an interest in looking for history as I was hiking. And so I'm going to give you an overview of trails in Washington, and then I'll focus on just a few specific ones, give you a little more detail about a few of them. I have about 44, some more hikes in the book, so there's quite a bit of territory to cover. This map, 1853, the Surveyor General has made a nice map of Washington Territory when we were separated from Oregon. And I know you can't see it too well, but The only trail, or the main trail over land at the time that's on this map is the Natchez Pass Trail, trail through Natchez Pass near Mount Rainier. And it was a cutoff from the Columbia River for those coming on the Oregon Trail. And it was a way to get to Puget Sound without having to continue down the Columbia River and then north to Puget Sound. It was an ancient trail, and Native Americans had used it. Hudson's Bay Company had used it. Cattle were driven over it. So it was a well-established trail in a sense, but you had to cross the river, the Natchez River, umpteen times because the cliffs came right down to the river. So it was not a very practical route and was not used after 1853, 1854. Instead, what people used were trails through, were water trails, but even before that, the main water trails, well, I'm sorry, let me go back to this map just to show a bit. Of course, the main water trails are along the Columbia River. That's how you were coming from the east. And then those coming from Europe were coming, or from Boston were coming up the coast and into the Strait of Juan de Fuca and then into Puget Sound. So the rivers, the Snake River also, the connected to the east, and the Columbia and the Snoqualmie River, these were the main waterways. These were the way you got around at the beginning. So when we're hiking, we're not really, can't hike these trails so easily. It's funny that the Lewis and Clark Trail is labeled along the Columbia River, but they were on the river, at least going westbound on canoes. And so to follow their trail, you're really just following campsites until you get to the end, Cape Disappointment, which is included in the book. So let's look at some of the earliest trails. Earliest trails were animal trails. This is not an animal trail, it's a human trail now, but this is a trail through O'Neill Pass in the Olympic Mountains. Lieutenant Joseph O'Neill was exploring with a party here in 1891. He was looking for an east-west route across the Olympics. He also his job, he was part of the Army, lieutenant. His job was to see if he could get a mule train across here, if it was a route for trade, and if there were any mineral resources, which would make people rich in the mountains. So went up the North Fork of the Snoqualmie River and just started following an elk trail. And he could not figure out, all of a sudden this elk trail disappeared and he couldn't figure out where they had gone. It took several days of his party roaming around until they discovered the pass that the elk had gone through, now named O'Neill Pass. So first trail that you follow then is an animal trail. This never became a wagon road. As you can see, it was not really that practical for mules, nor that profitable. They didn't find any minerals that they particularly wanted to undertake getting out. There are, of course, Native American trails, particularly through the Cascade Mountains. Red Becky and Range of Glaciers identifies at least 10 Native American trails that cross the Northern Cascades in Washington. And 6 of these are in the book because these are some of the oldest trails and the most interesting to hike through the mountains. This is Cascade Pass, goes through the North Cascades. The book also includes Pallets Pass, Snoqualmie Pass, Yakama Pass, and then the first edition I had Natchez Pass and Issaquah Pass, but Natchez Pass has become quite degraded by vehicle use. It's a Jeep trail now. It is not a good hiking trail, even though it has fascinating history. And we're going to look at one of these trails in depth, the Pallets Pass Trail, which is more than 7,000 years old. So animal trails and then ancient trails that the Native Americans have gone over. But let's look first at some of the maritime explorations and where they did touch on land. This is Cape Flattery. It's on the northwesternmost corner of the continental United States before Alaska joined. And it's a marvelous, very short hike once you get there. This is on the McCaw Reservation, which is still closed during the pandemic. But this is kind of a fearsome place, really. James Cook came through here looking for a bay, a safe harbor, and he flattered himself that this might be a safe place to sail into. That's why it's named Cape Flattery. But it was not. It was only the McCaw who really knew how to navigate this kind of of waterway. And the McCaw were international traders at the time of contact with Euro-Americans. This trail is one of my family did this one early. I'd never seen the Pacific Ocean. We hiked out, it's just about a half-mile trail. You couldn't see anything much. There was just salal on both sides and then cliffs that dropped off, but you could hear the roar of the Pacific Ocean. And that was my first contact really coming from Indiana, growing up there with the power of the Pacific Ocean. And the trail is much better maintained and built today, but you still get the power of the natural forces. This is Deception Pass. George Vancouver came through here in 1792. He named it Deception Pass because he thought he was sailing through along the tip of a peninsula. Instead, he sent Whidbey around to explore, and Whidbey discovered that it's an island, which became named after him. So there are trails at Deception Pass, including, if possible, to walk across the bridge over the pass itself. And then, of course, along the Columbia River was a main route of travel by canoe for the fur traders and for Lewis and Clark, who came out of the Rocky Mountains, down the Snake River to the Columbia, and out to what is now Cape Disappointment. And there is a wonderful discovery trail. When they got there, they camped, and Lewis said that he was going to take whoever wanted to go with him to explore along the coast. They just spent a day walking along the ocean. And so he did, a couple of days, and he encountered a huge sturgeon. And so you will find along this discovery trail in Cape Disappointment State Park in the Long Beach area, various markers commemorating Lewis and Clark, including this statue and this sturgeon along the way. You could also travel inland if you were quite intrepid. In 1847, a Canadian artist named Paul Kane was traveling around the Northwest. He was sketching, and then later he turned these sketches into paintings, which he sold of Native Americans and of the landscape. And he came through the Grand Coulee. And let me read you just a little bit about why he did that. What you're looking at now, of course, is the Grand Coulee filled in by Banks Lake, which is backed up from the Grand Coulee Dam. But you're seeing Steamboat Rock, which still comes out of the water here, and you can hike up to the top of Steamboat Rock and go either direction. Some days it's very windy, almost got blown off this rock at one point, but it's a wonderful hike. But here's Paul Kane. He said, he had determined to go to Fort Colville on the upper Columbia River by the Grand Coulee, as he called it, the French pronunciation. Part of the coulee's allure was its mystery. No one could tell him anything about it, nor could I hear of another, either Indian or white, who had penetrated any considerable distance up it. The place was, however, so much talked of as an abode of evil spirits and other strange things that I could not resist the desire of trying to explore it. And so he did. It's about 150 miles long. There's not a lot of water, and he had a pretty tough time. But a lot of people passed by Steamboat Rock and noted it in the 1800s. So it's a landmark for inland travel if you're trying to go north and south. Other explorations, paths of exploration. This is the press expedition. They were enlisted by the Seattle Press newspaper, who advertised for men of vim and vigor. And they went through the Olympic Mountains from north to south in the middle of winter, which actually was not such a bad way to travel because you could pull a sled over the snow with a lot of your goods. And then O'Neill came the year after this. This was 1890 that the press expedition went through up the Elwha River Valley and then over the passes and to the Quinault River. And then, of course, they wrote about it for the newspaper. And then O'Neill came looking east-west route a year later. So building on these Native American trails, these paths of exploration, fur trade routes developed along these. There's one skeet shoe road along the Little Spokane River that's described in the book. And then you get military roads and wagon roads developing on these same routes. This is a military road. The first non-native settlements tended to be around military posts. So that was Fort Vancouver on the Columbia and also the Dalles on the Oregon side of the Columbia River. And you could cross the river to Dalles Port on the north side. And this military road led to Fort Simcoe, which is now on the Yakama Indian Reservation, Fort Simcoe State Park. But this is in Columbia Hills State Park. And you can walk parts of this military road, which also became a stagecoach route, and was, of course, based on an old Native American trail through this landscape, which is wonderful in the spring and fall. I wouldn't go there in the summer. As you can see, it's quite exposed, but it's beautiful country for those of us used to the woods over here. So from military roads, then you begin to get wagon roads, both for carrying people and freight. This is the Snoqualmie Wagon Road, which guess who built this? The West Seattleites, David and Arthur Denny. They had mining interests at Snoqualmie Pass area. They also wanted to trade with Eastern Washington, as did Eastern Washington ranchers and farmers want to trade with the West Side. So they built this wagon road in 1867, and 6 wagons actually passed over it that year. It's a very difficult road to maintain. It gets washed out. It still gets washed out if you're hiking along it. But you can pick up this road at the Denny Creek campground, marked by this wagon wheel, and follow it for part of the way up to Snoqualmie Pass. You'll need to take a road for the rest of the way, and I'll show you that road eventually. So that's Western Washington. Eastern Washington, you begin to get ferries and wagon roads. This is the White Bluffs Ferry. The White Bluffs is in the background there across the Columbia River. This is where the Columbia bends north, so you've got a north-south stretch there. And people are coming. Eventually, Oregon and Steam Navigation Company wanted to carry freight from Portland up the Columbia River and then across here, landing at White Bluffs and then continuing overland to inland forts and mining camps and places where they could sell produce. So this ferry at White Bluffs operated in the 1860s. At one time, when it was really flourishing, there were 50 mule teams traveling on it, each of them carrying 5,000 pounds of freight. One time they carried the engine for a steamboat on the mules over the Saddle Mountains, which are north of here. And you can see that in this picture here. This is a picture of the White Bluffs on the eastern side of the Columbia, which is now part of called the Hanford Reach. And the Saddle Mountains there are in the distance. So you get these mules carrying a steamboat engine over those mountains to get to lakes on the other side, so where they could assemble the boat and continue carrying freight. This road did not last too long. It was eclipsed by the Mullen Road, a little farther east in Eastern Washington. But again, a trail remains, so it's great. You can still hike in this area, and it's a wonderful area because it is so unpeopled. Across on the west side is the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, and the town of White Bluffs residents were forced to leave in 1943 for an unknown reason. They didn't know why they were forced out of their homes and orchards, but that part became part of the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. And you can see, this is kind of using the telephoto on my camera, you can see standing on the east side of the river, you can see over to some kind of ghost buildings of the towns of Hanford and White Bluffs on the other side of the river. Another wagon road, this is the Scheibner Break, built in 1902, kind of using hand tools and axes. This is above Northrop Canyon, which is down in this area, which was a farming area. It's, if you hike in Northrop Canyon today, it's a wonderful oasis in the middle of what is often dry eastern Washington, but you go back into this canyon and valley. It was irrigated and it's very green. You see Steamboat Rock in the background here. This is right across from Steamboat Rock. So this is a family going on the Scheibners, were local farmers. And the trail goes both in the canyon below and then on this old road up above too. And you get, following these roads, sheep and cattle trails. The Caribou Trail went to 1858, went to the mining fields of the Caribou region in what is now Canada. Again, an north-south route, and it's a cattle drive route where you're driving cattle to the mining camps. The easy way to get cattle to the market is on the hoof. This is a section of the Caribou Trail that goes through McLaughlin Canyon, which is on the east side of the Okanagan River. And it has suffered from wildfires a few years ago. So you see the blackened snags here. It's a very haunting part of the trail. There was an ambush here. This was Native American land, but the miners were trespassing to get to the gold fields, and they were attacked in this canyon. And lastly, these wagon roads then became stagecoach routes. This is a group of children probably posing, not probably traveling too far, on a stagecoach road that went over Calacan Pass, which is between Wenatchee and Ellensburg. And there is still this is one of the first automobile roads in the state, but it didn't, you wouldn't travel. Well, you can travel by car today if you really don't care much about what happens to your car. I found it much better to walk it from the north side. From the south side, I did go up on a Jeep with some friends, but this was this is up into the Calacan Hills. There was a lot of cattle ranching up at the top of these hills, and it's I find Eastern Washington a fascinating place to hike because it's so different, but this is very exposed, as you can see too. It's a great hike. Okay, so finally we get a little bit more mechanized, and we get into the railroad era, which is huge in Washington State. We have so many, 3 different transcontinental railroads coming out here eventually. This is part of the Iron Goat Trail through which the Northern Pacific Railroad went at Stevens Pass. The Iron Goat Trail is what I kind of call I used to call the Cadillac, probably the Lexus now, or maybe the Tesla of railroad rails to trails, because it had so many volunteer hours put into it. It's a wonderfully maintained and interpreted trail. And these were snow sheds. You may have heard of the book, The White Cascade, about the avalanche in the 1920s that killed more than 100 people who were on 2 trains going through this stretch above Stevens Pass. The railroad was originally built above the pass, and after these avalanches, eventually the tunnel was put through at Stevens Pass. And you can hike this trail. There are several trailheads. You start high, you're walking on a rail trail, so there's not much elevation gain at all. And you are above where the Northern Pacific, the Burlington Northern, runs today. Oh, I'm sorry, the Great Northern, the Burlington Northern. And you can see the tunnel, the entrance to the tunnel below you. So sometimes you can see the trains, if you're up there long enough, going through the tunnel at the below you. And you're walking through, there are several tunnels. I think there were 14 tunnels originally on this stretch. There are a few still remaining. You can walk through this one right at the beginning. The others, you kind of peek in and they're too dangerous to walk through. But the rail trail is lovely. This is at one of the trailheads. This trailhead is at Scenic. Scenic was a resort hotel built along the Great Northern. This is also where the bodies of those killed in the avalanche were brought down from the trail far above. This is a rest area on Highway 2 right before you arrive at Stevens Pass. So you can stop here for bathrooms, trailheads to the Iron Goat Trail, and explore this caboose if you'd like to do that. Another rail trail that is new for this edition of the book is the Snoqualmie Valley Trail, which was the Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern Railway built in 1885. The first transcontinental railroad, the Northern Pacific, had come along the Columbia River originally, and then up to Tacoma as its terminus. And Seattle folks were quite disappointed by the choice of Tacoma as the terminal. Didn't come all the way to Seattle, and they decided to build their own railroad across Snoqualmie Pass, but it didn't get that far. It only got as far as North Bend. It followed the rivers, the Snohomish, the Skykomish, and the Snoqualmie River. And today it's a wonderful long trail through the Snoqualmie Valley. Even on a rainy, cloudy day like this one, you can enjoy your walk. And there are many layers of history along this. The Snoqualmie tribe was quite numerous and powerful. In the mid-1800s, this became a fertile agricultural area. There was a lot of logging, and the largest hops farm in the world was located here for a while. So you can walk through this toward Mount Si, and eventually trails like this, the Snoqualmie Valley Trail and the Snoqualmie Wagon Road and other trails, could lead you all the way across the Cascades and into eastern Washington. Final railroad to be built after the Northern Pacific went along Columbia River, and today goes through Stampede Pass in a tunnel. So that you don't see it there. And then the Great Northern going through Stevens Pass, and then the Milwaukee Road went through Snoqualmie Pass, built in 1908, and is now part of made into a long trail that goes all the way across the state. It's called the Palouse to Cascades Trail. It used to be the John Wayne Trail in the eastern part of the state, but has changed names. There's just a small part of it in eastern Washington that is still used as a railroad or goes across private property, but you can hike, bike, horseback ride all the way across the state on this. This is a trestle on the west side of the mountains here. You can access this trail at Cedar River, Cedar Falls Education Center, and at various places, McClellan Butte Trail and at Lake Trail. You can get there. So railroads made it possible to carry heavy minerals out of the mineral-rich mountains. So you begin to get a lot of mining roads combined with railroads and mine-to-market roads. If you were all here at ask you, I'm sure some people would recognize this. If I could see you, this is Monte Cristo. I've called it the best ghost town in Washington. These buildings don't actually date from the heyday of Monte Cristo. They were Forest Service cabins and resort cabins, but this basin was the site of Monte Cristo in the 1890s, where 2,000 people were living and working and exporting $1 million worth of ore a week out the railroad that was constructed to Everett. So the way to get to Monte Cristo today is to walk this rail trail 4 miles in and then 4 miles out. and you get to this basin, a town site that has a lot of interpretation signs for where different houses were, where the concentrator was that concentrated the ore that was taken out, where there's a locomotive turntable here, a real one. No locomotive, but the turntable is still there, and you, with a couple of people, you can make it turn. So this is a great hike along a rail trail. Another mining route, it was through the Cascade Pass to Stehekin, up the Stehekin River Valley. This is the entrance to the Black Warrior mine, which was a working mine until the 1950s. So there was a road that went from this mine and then east to Stehekin. Today, you can hike to Cascade Pass from the west side, and then you can go all the way through on a backpacking hike for most people to Stehekin. And part of it is along the road that led to this Black Warrior mine, which is a side trail off the Cascade Pass trail. Also, mining history came to Roslyn. The Northern Pacific was building trains, and you need a lot of power to run the trains. So the Northern Pacific was always on the alert for coal, and they found it in Roslyn. There's now a coal mines trail that leads from Clayle into Roslyn, where the train went from the mines at Roslyn to the train station in South Clayle. This is a picture of African-American miners at Roslyn. This mining community was as diverse as it can be. The cemetery there has, I believe it's 38 different plots according to ethnic groups. So they were coming from all kinds of European countries. And then they began to organize into a union, went on strike, and the Northern Pacific called in strike breakers, African-American strike breakers from the South. And they did break the strike after the strike, but many of the white miners lost their jobs, others stayed. Many of the black miners who had come in also stayed, and you had an integrated community, one of the largest African-American communities in the state at that time, and eventually produced Washington's first Black mayor. So this is early pioneers there. So another kind of historic trail, and one of the favorites, what people love to do is hike to a lookout, and there have been many in Washington. As we well know from the summer, fires are a constant presence, and they were fierce. In 1902, the Yakama burn claimed some 30 lives and destroyed a lot of property around the Columbia River in Skamania County, followed by fires in 1919, 1926. And these fires prompted extensive construction of fire lookouts throughout the Cascades. By the 1960s, Washington had more than 600 of these cabins, only a few of which are still standing and still used today. They've been replaced by aerial reconnaissance. But the lore of these lookouts, and I'll talk much more about one of them, Sourdough, a little bit later, is part of the reason people love to hike, I think, is just to reach a lookout cabin, even if it's not open or still used, just to see what it was like to live high up, so high up. This is a Sourdough, which I will talk about more in the North Cascades. This is another one in the Kettle River Range. This was the site of the Copper Butte Lookout. And if you're hiking, you often will not find a cabin anymore, but you might find something like this cot, this iron cot, so the detritus of the people leave behind, which now seems quite charming. And I want to talk just a little bit about lookouts during World War II, because these are fascinating stories in the Olympic Mountains in particular. During World War II, there was fear in the Puget Sound area of planes coming from Japan to the defense works at Boeing and to the shipyards. And so there was a whole series of an aircraft warning system established in the Olympic Mountains and on the beaches of the Olympic Peninsula. And it called for people to live in these lookouts year-round and to 24 hours, 7 days a week. You needed at least 2 people. They hired couples. And this was the lookout on Hurricane Hill, which in the winter of 1942, 1943, Herb and Lois Chrysler lived here. Herb especially was well known for his films of elk and in the Olympic Mountains, and for many places, backcountry camps that he established there. This is his photograph of what Hurricane Hill looked like that winter. And this is what it looks like today. It's just a slab. It's a very popular hike, not too hard to get to, and beautiful views. I will say that during that whole 2 or 3 years that the aircraft warning system was in effect, they did not ever spot an airplane coming over. And gradually, the U.S. decided it was not a danger as the war went on. The first edition of this book has Dodger Mountain with another couple in it. A woman that I met when I was writing the book, who did her last hike to the Dodger Peak Lookout when she was 80 years old. So there's a lot of romance around lookouts. And finally, in my overview here of kinds of trails, historic trails, and how they developed in Washington, I want to talk about roads, some of which are quite fine today, and some of which make just good hiking trails. This is, I doubt, again, if you were all here, I might ask you if anybody had a guess as to what famous highway this is. This is Highway 410. Goes up to Mount Rainier. You can see it frequently washed out. This highway developed from that original trail over Natchez Pass. It doesn't go over Natchez Pass now, but the Natchez Pass Trail became known, part of it, as the Immigrant Road with an E, immigrant. This was the road that the path that the Longmire Party took in 1853. And it's quite well journaled and written about. And as I said, they after a couple of years, they abandoned the Natchez Pass route. But today, part of that route still goes through Federation Forest State Park, and Highway 410 goes right along it. And they were following the White River. So they follow the White River west towards Chihuahua. And this road then became the chosen route through up to Chinook Pass rather than Natchez Pass. The state decided to build the highway through Chinook instead of Natchez. So this is the way it has looked. Another famous road that today is still a road, but you can walk on it because there's very little traffic. This is the Yellowstone Trail is called, or the Sunset Highway, or the Serpentine Road. It had many names. You can see why it might have been called the Serpentine Road. It was part of something called the Yellowstone Trail. On your way to the Denny Creek Campground, you can still see a symbol for the Yellowstone Trail painted on a rock. When people began, ordinary people, middle-class people at least, began to be able to afford, sorry, I hit that too quickly, able to afford automobiles, auto tourism became fashionable. Denny Creek Campground is one of the first, I think it's the oldest campground in the state. So you have tourists coming over Snoqualmie Pass on the Sunset Highway. And if you follow the Snoqualmie Wagon Road segment today from Denny Creek Campground, you will get to this old stretch of road, which is paved, but you can walk it carefully. It was used as an alternative in the 1960s. I think I-90 was being built. And you can still get all the way up to Snoqualmie Pass on this. You're following a fork of the Snoqualmie River up to the pass on this. So that takes us through all kinds of trails, historic trails, what I mean by an historic trail and how they developed in Washington. And I'd like to focus on three, just to give you a little bit more detailed sense instead of a quick flyover here. This is one of my favorite trails in the book because it is so old and because I've spent time with Forest Service anthropologists searching for remnants of this trail. This is an ancient pass through the South Cascades, documented in use for at least 7,000 years. This is called the, and you'll see this sign here, historic route of Yakama Pallets Indian Trail route. Of course, this is the route it followed a creek, Summit Creek. You may not be on the same exact trail, but Indians traveling this way would have been in a group and they would have fanned out over quite a bit of territory. So you're on the same foot treads eventually of people who've been crossing this pass for hundreds of years. This was used by Pallets people on the west side, Yakama people on the east side to travel into the mountains when the berries were ripe. And when it was good hunting season, they would meet at the pass. They would camp there for several weeks. They would socialize. They would find mates eventually, pick and smoke berries, and spend, a nice summer, I would think, at Pallets Pass. It was not for entertainment, of course, but it was a natural way of life, of survival. This is where you found food sources for the winter to carry you through the winter. We know about this trail partly through the testimony interview of a man named Jim Yoke, pictured here with his wife Annie and an adopted granddaughter. He talked with the anthropologist Melville Jacobs in the 1920s, and he named more than 300 characteristics of the landscape along this trail. He gave the native name for these features and identified them. So a lot of the trail following that goes today follows some of the landmarks that he mentioned. And you will see him sitting in front of a teepee, even though he's near what is now Packwood, Washington, on the west side of the Cascades. This is because between these two peoples traveling over this pass, a new group of people developed, the Taitnakon, who had characteristics of both sides of the mountains. So the teepees are more typical of the east side, but you see a teepee here on the west side. And other characteristics like hats and hairstyles and language in particular were specific to this group of people, the Taitnakon. They followed the Pallets River. So this trail followed the Pallets River through the what's called the Big Bottom of the Columbia River, Randall, Packwood area just north of Mount St. Helens. You came, one of the camping spots along the trail, which is now Logisquas Campground, was this beautiful Blue Hole, which is at the confluence of the Clear Fork and the Ohanapakash rivers. And the people come here today, swim, wade. It's a beautiful place, and you get the sense if you are there that, of course, this is where people would have been. They would have camped here at this confluence of the rivers. They would have fished. This is a wonderful sense of history. From this confluence, they follow Summit up to the summit. Along the way, they make baskets for picking. Cut the bark off of cedar trees, a rectangular slot cut here. They would, from this, and this is one of the ways you can tell where the trail was, is where these cedar trees have this marking. There are markings still on the trees of the Vistas. Some only 100 or 200 years old, but yet they, this is a characteristic of the trails. And they would take this bark and fold it and string it together, made a very crude basket. This is not the kind of wonderful basket weaving that is sometimes done, but this was had a very utilitarian purpose to collect berries, and so you took it with you on the way to the mountains. So today, if you're hiking this trail, you start at where that signpost was a while ago, Trail 44, it's called. You start at Soda Springs Campground, and this was a these are the Soda Springs, which are right near the campground. At the time, just a minute, let me get my notes a bit. When this was a spring that was known for its healing powers or soothing powers to Native Americans, some entrepreneurs came along and decided to bottle it and try and sell it. And they said they called it Tumac. This is Tumac Mineral Springs. It's named after a mountain that I'll tell you about in a little bit. And they said, let Tumac, they sold it to help you normalize. But the liquid would turn a brown, dark color in the bottle, and they were not very successful at it. But the springs are still here. So you start up this trail, you get to the top of Pallets Pass, and it's not one of those dramatic passes where all of a sudden your feet know that you've gone over the pass. Instead, it's a plateau area with lots of lakes and ponds and many places to camp, many places to spend a lot of time. It's in the shadow of Mount Rainier, so you, on a good day, you can see the mountain, and you can continue on the trail across Tumac Mountain, which is named for two Macs. They were sheep herders who would race their Scottish sheep herders who would race their herds to the mountains each summer. And here in the summer of 1917, William O. Douglas walked up. He was a teenager at the time. He walked up from Yakama, which he did regularly for his health. And he brought a newspaper along and read it to the sheep herders, telling them about the U.S. entrance into, maybe this 1914, sorry, the outbreak of World War I, but he was reading the news to them. So you can hike this mountain, around this mountain, and continuing seeing the Cascades in the distance. The east side of this trail that the Yakama took up is there is no Forest Service trail you can follow today. There is the William O. Douglas Trail group led by Ray and Susan Paolella has mapped what they think is the route that the Yakama took, but it's overgrown and hard to follow. And there was an ancient village of Miyawak, the Yakama village, which was flooded under the Rimrock Dam, so on the Tieton River. So here you can see hikers in Cascadians hiking group on the east side overlooking Rimrock Lake with Mount Rainier in the distance there, overlooking what would have been the ancient Yakama village. So I've done this hike several times. I find it has a lot of resonance. This is the favorite hike that my co-author, Craig Romano, did. I did all the hikes in this book except for this one. I hiked Desolation Peak for the first edition. That was 8 miles and 4,000 feet elevation gain. This one is even tougher, and I was happy to have Craig do it. So the story of Sourdough Mountain as well as Desolation Peak is again a story of lookouts in the mountains. Sourdough was named after the starter for the bread that the miners made. There were miners in the 1870s, 1880s into the Skagit River Valley, panning for gold. But just as as they were there, they were a ready market. A woman named Lucinda Davis, a single woman with 3 children, came from Colorado in 1890, and she opened a roadhouse and a store for miners at the settlement at Diablo. And she and her young son, Lee, would sometimes ride horseback up the south side of the mountains for a picnic. And they started stacking cairns at the top. And when Glee worked for the Forest Service, he chose Sourdough as the area's first lookout in 1917. But it became popular with poets, of all things, in the 1950s. There's a book called Poets on the Peak, which talks about Jack Kerouac, Gary Snyder, Bill Whalen, who is pictured here, and their summers in the 1950s as lookouts where they could scan the skies for fire, but also, we hope, be inspired to write poetry. Gary Snyder had grown up in the Northwest. He roomed with Bill Whalen at Reed College, and he went hiking with Kerouac, and he persuaded other poets to come up and work for the Forest Service. He said the Skagit country was the greatest place in America. So Whalen was a lookout here, 53, 54, 55, and they did write poems about their experience there. At least one of which is in the book. So I'll leave that for you to read. This is my co-author, Craig, looming above Ross Lake, and you can see why it's such a good place for a lookout. I want to finish with a local hike, and very close to home, and I'm calling it an historic hike too. You will recognize, no doubt, that this is the Duwamish Waterway, flowing into Elliott Bay, West Marshall Way, with which some of us are all too familiar these days. And between the river, the waterway, and the West Marshall Way is Hyapus, an ancient Duwamish village. And there is a short trail, a bike trail too, in this park, but this is not the trail I included in the book. I'll show you that in a little bit, but as you know, the Duwamish waterway was straightened and dredged in the early 1900s, leaving just in our neighborhood this small natural area, Kellogg Island, which is across, which is where the Hyapus Park is today too. But looking the other direction, you see this greenbelt. This green belt of trees on the west side of the waterway, which is now the West Duwamish Greenbelt. 500 acres, it's the largest contiguous forest in the city of Seattle. Much of it is Seattle Parks land. And this is a trail that I chose to include in the book. This is a 1920 aerial of the same, looking the same direction, and you will see that green line going through indicates where the trails are. Some of the trails are today. There are many trails in this green belt. The one I included in the book is the one that was built in and is maintained by the Parks Department. There are many social trails through it, so you can wander quite a bit. You'll see in this photograph that the hillside was quite bare, fairly bare in 1920. It had been logged. The Puget Mill Company owned this property and had logged it. It has regrown today, but also there was a streetcar line running through. I think this indicates it right here, going from the community of Riverside, where the bridge is, and south into Burien. So there's that streetcar line ran through. It was a line that got people into the growing suburbs and communities of south, including Burien, Three Tree Point, and so forth. It ran through the 1930s and then became too difficult to maintain. There were landslides in this area. It got buried. You can hike today. You can find the remnants of it today if you know what you're looking for. Some of you may know that in this spring, Clay Eels and Jean Sherrard photographed this trail in the Greenbelt from a helicopter. It's in their Now and Then column, Seattle Times. You look very carefully, you will see a line of white dots. This is marking the trail so that you can see it from above. And we marked that trail with white plastic bags, which I will show you a bit more. This was before the trees were in full bloom. We wanted some way to make the trail visible from the air so that you could compare it to that 1920 photograph. And came up with the bright idea of putting white plastic garbage bags down. So we'll look at that a little bit more. So this is the trailhead at 14th and Holly, one of the trailheads for the Greenbelt, the one that's in the book. And you'll see the white plastic bags on the ground here as we started marking the trail. We had a 8 o'clock in the morning. It was a pretty cool morning, March, February. And we had a corps of volunteers walking down the trail and putting these bags down so you could see them from above. I want you to know that every single plastic bag was picked up and reused, many of them coming from housing co-op nearby. So this is the trailhead. You can see what some parts of the trail look like. And this is a lightly used trail, I have to say, although some people run it. But it is, I call it historic because it's on Duwamish land. And when Ken Workman leads a hike through here, he will tell you that his ancestors are in the soil, in the trees, and they are part of us as we walk this trail. So the trail itself is not historic, but the landscape certainly is. And if you're really observant, you will find some endearing wildlife. A photo I'd kind of like to leave you with here. These were barred owls born in the Greenbelt this spring and photographed all summer by a guy named Leo Shaw. This is in the northern part of the Greenbelt. It's not on the trail that included in the book. But if you want to find out more about the trails in the Greenbelt and even more pictures of these owls, you can go to the website for the West Duwamish Greenbelt Trails Group, WDGT, I call it widget.com. This is a trails group that is advocating for constructing a trail from the ridge, the top of Puget Ridge, down to the Duwamish Longhouse and to the river. We call it the Ridge to River Trail. The Duwamish Tribal Services has been studying the feasibility of this trail, and we want to get a trail that goes all the way from the top of the ridge to the Longhouse. You can get there today, but it's a little hairy, so we'd like to get a better constructed trail. So I'll leave you with this and be ready to take questions. Just kind of what I want to share with you basically is the feeling that if you hike trails and you love them and you know their history, we can preserve them for future generations to enjoy. So I'm ready to talk trails with you instead of this monologue that's been going on. So I'd like to hear from you.
Thank you, Judy. Already there was a comment about someone loving Lake Ross, thinking that camping, where was that? The cute little camp where the group was sitting at the picnic table, that looked like a really fun place too.
That was Monte Cristo, right?
Yes, right. I forgot. Thank you. So the first question has to do with the old native trails, but are there any original traces left to see from them on those trails?
Yes, to some extent. On the Pallets Pass trail, I learned a lot from Rick McClure, who is an anthropologist for the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. And the trail that you hike today, the Forest Service Trail 44, is a maintained trail, so there wouldn't be, anything original has been superseded by that trail. But he has been trying to map that trail all the way through the Pallets River Valley. And he has shown me, and he has found what he can feel underfoot. As he says, this is where they went, because you can feel it underfoot. I mean, that's a very kind of ambivalent thing, but I walked with him on a portion of that behind a ranger station, an old house that's being restored at the Whistler campground for rangers. And behind that, if you walk, you can see even though there are small trees and shrubs growing, you can see what looked like, would have been a wide path that people followed. So when you say, can you see remnants of these trails? Yes. And of course, I mean, someplace like Pallets Pass, you're up there at Pallets Pass, you know exactly where the pass is there. And so, sure, what you're seeing, the same rocks you're seeing are rocks that, the big ones are ones that you've seen forever. And artifacts have been found by archaeologists at these places too. I'm thinking as I talk about, you go to Sequatchie Creek Trail out of DuPont, and you come to leftover railroad ties or rails where the dynamite trail ran from the DuPont powder works down to Nisqually Reach, where they were loaded on the ships to be sent around the world. So you'll find remnants of Iron Goat Trail. Well, here's one, Northrop Canyon. You walk through Northrop Canyon, you'll come to a field that is full of rusted tin cans. Okay, and that's not the trail itself, but that's from the construction of the Grand Coulee Dam, the workers on that, and it's a protected state park artifact. You're not to mess with the tin cans there. So yes, I guess you'll see artifacts, and in a few places you would actually see the tread or feel the tread.
Thank you. That was from Patrick Dolan. And Patrick, if you have any follow-up questions, I forgot to offer you the opportunity to talk to her direct, but I can do that in a few minutes if you'd like. Austin Watson has some questions, and I would like him to ask you that live. So can you unmute him, Michael? And Austin, you want a question? Ask her directly.
Can you hear me?
I can see you and hear you.
You can see it's still with me. So I hike a lot in Seattle. I hiked 3,700 miles last year around Seattle, and there's a lot of cool things. But the West Duwamish Greenbelt is really fun to hike in. I did it several times. There's lots of trails, and what I noticed was the north part, and I'll call the north part, sort of from the college north up to the bay, was really nice. There was a big road going down the hill. Once I crossed it, it got pretty sketchy, and there were some kind of scary encampments in there. And I ended up hightailing it out of there when people started looking at me funny. What's the plan for the south end part of that whole section? Is it going to get sort of worked on, cleaned up? Anyway,
When you saw the encampments, were you saying that was the north end or the south end of the
south end? South. The north
south
was
end.
very
So
nice.
It is
North.
on that, and that wide road that you're hiking was a sand and gravel road. That is part of the trail.
Yeah. After you exit that and cross, there's a huge road paved that goes up the hill there.
Yeah, Highland Parkway that goes up.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm aware of that sketchiness right at the end of that trail. And the members of our West Duwamish Greenbelt Trail group have taken pictures, on the Find It, Fix It app and reported it.
I probably did go.
And sometimes, there, in the past, there's been more actually, but that particular camp, I mean, I haven't seen that camp itself. I've just seen vehicles parked there that shouldn't be parked there.
Yeah. But
is there a plan for that? Not unless we keep complaining.
Yeah, well, I know how that goes. I mean, I
Yeah.
do Find It and Fix It. I live in Seattle,
Yeah.
and I've watched the camps go up and down. I will say, in 2019, I could walk 6 miles in any direction from downtown and not see a tent.
Yeah.
COVID kind of screwed that up, understandably, and it is slowly turning the corner again. It's excruciating. It's just going to take time. So anyway, I'm hopeful. I live here and I'm not leaving. So,
I
okay, well,
think,
thank you.
I hesitated because of that to include this in the book, but I think people need to use the trails. And
Yeah,
the
we do. We
first
need to
part-
take back our city. Yeah.
And the first part of the trail has been, this Parks Department has often used it as a kind of a project to involve youth groups. They built different things like steps and benches. I mean, it's kind of a whole lesson in trail building in the first part of it. So it's interesting for that.
Yeah, it's lovely trail on the north part. It's just wonderful. I'd recommend it to anybody. In fact, maybe I'll go do it again in the next couple of weeks.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it was an interesting answer for all of us. Michael has a question for you, I think. Judy?
Sure.
Yeah, Judy, I guess maybe it's a two-parter, and you've alluded to your answer to this in your presentation. But the first part of the question is, what's your favorite historic hike? You know, I'd be eager to hear a little bit about that. And then the second might be, is there a specific hike in our state that you've not had the chance to complete that you'd like to?
Okay. I'm actually adjusting my volume here but I remember those questions. So are you still seeing something reasonable up there, or what are you seeing?
So right now we are seeing your background with the, now we're seeing the cover of Hiking Washington.
Okay, let's leave it there. Favorites. Oh, you know, I vacillate. I mean, I love most of the hikes in this book. One that I have told people about that I've picked out as a favorite is the Chief Joseph Summer Trail in southeastern Washington. And I've chosen that partly because you can hike there and not see a soul. But it's also a beautiful country that the Nez Perce were forced to give up. And it's so little known. You have to, and hard to reach. You have to drive a Forest Service road for 20 miles or so to get into it. But the Nez Perce would again come into the mountains during the summer from the Wallowa Valley and hunt and socialize and dry berries and so forth. And it's just beautiful open country in the mountains. So that's one favorite. When we first moved out here, people said we have to go to Cascade Pass and Edie's Landing. Cascade Pass has become very popular, but those are both beautiful. There's so much variety in Washington. I mean, you've got ocean beaches, you've got mountains, and then you've got the expanses of eastern Washington. So there's a lot to like. Plus, we have 3 national parks. How many states have that much public land available? Scenic. A hike that I'd like to do that I haven't done. Yes, the Boundary Trail. The surveyors came through marking the international boundary between Canada and the US. That's up in the Pasayten. There's a section in the Pasayten Wilderness, which I did get to once, but couldn't spend much time at. I'd like to explore that more. And it's surprising. Well, there are the other passes that had Native American trails through the Cascades. I would like to explore more of those too. I'll leave it at the Boundary Trail, I think.
Thanks, Judy.
Thank you, Michael. Austin has another question. Are you still there, Austin? Go ahead and ask it.
I am. Yeah, I can go on forever because I do hike a lot. So there's some trails in West Seattle, Mi'kmaq Mooks Park trails. And I wanted to do it, but I just never seem to. I generally just go for a walk along the shoreline. Can you talk about access to those trails, condition, and just,
I can
give me some
talk about-
motivation. I want to go do them.
We can talk about Mi'kmaq Mooks. There's also Schmitz Park too. And of course, Lincoln Park, but Mi'kmaq Mooks I live near there. You access that from, on the water side of Beach Drive is Emma Schmidt's Overlook.
Yeah,
And
I'm
on
looking that up.
the inlight side is Newcastle. And if you go back towards, there's a sign back there. I think it's been a bit obscured now, but an interpretive sign. You start there and go up the hill. You are going up to what was the old Schmidt's mansion.
Okay.
The Schmidt's family, which he was on the Parks Board. And if you go up there, you'll see the foundations of a driveway for their house. It was torn down in the 1960s. But if you go, then turn south, so there is a main trail that goes all the way south through there.
Yep.
There's been a lot of forest ivy removal and planting there. You get to the very end, and there it's a little hard. It comes down to Jacobson Road, and it's steep and sometimes covered with blackberries, but it does go all the way through. There is another outlet, a side trail you can take to get out before then, but it's worth doing. I'd
Okay.
say.
I'll go conquer it. Yeah. Good.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
then of course, Schmidt's Park trails, I think, are much more.
Yeah, I've done that one
Yeah.
a zillion times. That's just a gorgeous place. Yeah.
That's good. I think we've come to the end of the questions, but I have a final one, Judy, admitting that I do not hike. But if you were to encourage me or anyone else listening tonight, tell me how you handle the transportation, especially the longer hikes. You mentioned the one specific one tonight was 4 miles in and then 4 miles back. The longer ones, where do you leave your car? How do you get home at the end of the hike?
Well, most of these are in and out hikes. I mean, they're trailheads with parking lots, generally. Some of the most popular ones now have shuttles to them. All of these that are in the book are, I can't think of anywhere. You just park at, you just park at a trailhead. Sometimes you'll need a pass. If it's a national forest, there's a Forest Service Pass, which is the same as the National Parks Pass. Some of them are state parks. You need a Discover Pass. So, and the other thing you need is if you're going on Forest Service roads, you're going to need a car with high clearance because they don't maintain those completely. So Subaru is a good car.
That's good to know. I really respect the time and the research that you've done to make stories out of these very interesting scenes. And I know that you had to look for those. You don't find those on the trail, do you? So.
But you can actually, I meant this book to be for armchair folks too. So you can just read the history and think about the trails. You don't have to go out and do them.
I like that. And it's especially enjoyed the pictures you showed tonight that, yeah, leaves, encourage us to use our imagination of what that was like for those people in those years. Yeah, that was very good. Well, if there no other questions, we're ready to say goodnight and thank you again very much for your time and your effort in publishing these for other people to use. We enjoy seeing you, and you're always so candid and positive about our area, and makes the rest of us interested in trying it. Michael, Sandy D is thanking us and saying good night to us. So did Deb K and Jackie. She said she was late because of keeping webinar. And she'll check out the book, Judy. There you go. You sold one there. And Austin says, thank you. Lots more hiking ideas from you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Good. Michael?
Yeah, thanks again, Judy, and thanks to everybody that joined us this evening. And of course, thanks to you too, Dora Faye, for facilitating this evening's session. Judy, just a wonderful presentation, and I'm eager to explore many of the trails that you've shared with us this evening. So thank you for your insights and the background. Again, I want to encourage anyone who's interested in purchasing the book to do so at either Paperboat Booksellers here in West Seattle or the Pegasus Book Exchange. And of course, we do have copies available here at the Log House Museum. If you're interested in supporting the Historical Society as a member or through a donation, or you'd like to learn more about our upcoming programming or offerings, I'd encourage you to follow us on social media or to visit our website, loghousemuseum.org. Again, the museum is open to the public Fridays through Sundays, noon to 4 p.m. And I should let you know that we are really excited about an upcoming program that we are hosting, and it's actually going to be led by Judy next Saturday, cycle history. So you should explore our website to learn a little bit more. And of course, we have a forthcoming exhibit in partnership with the Duwamish Longhouse called The Spirit Returns, which is going to be opening in early October. So again, there's all kinds of information about our upcoming offerings on our website, loghousemuseum.org. With that, again, thanks to Judy. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next month. Take care.
Thank you, Michael. Good night. A lot of people are saying thank you. Nice presentation, Judy. I don't know if you have a chance to look at those chats, the comments, but again, we thank all of you for being here and for your questions as well. Good night, everybody.